Right now on It's Gonna Be Fine, was life actually better before smartphones? Or were we just bored, technologically deprived old farts who didn't know any better? One Atlantic writer has some thoughts, and I have some thoughts about his thoughts. Here we go. Hello and welcome to It's Gonna Be Fine. I'm so glad you are with us. We have had so many guests recently, guest co-hosts, guest experts. The last 8 episodes or so have had people join us, and I was feeling it was time to just be you and me. So we're going to take today's episode to reconnect. We've got some interesting topics to talk about, and I'm excited to just go back to the basics with you, the listener. We've got some good shows coming up. Next week, David will be back. After that, we've got some more guests as well. So more to look forward to, but peppering in these solo episodes every now and then where it's just us is kind of nice. So I'm excited to do that today. And before we get into the show, just a couple of things. Now that we are, sitting down together and there's been a lot of activity on the show, this is episode 24, which is incredible. And we've had some progress here on the show. So just as a reminder, we have an Instagram page. The profile is It's Gonna Be Fine _pod. So you can follow there. And we also launched a website. And that website is itsgonnabefine.fm. Call back to radio days, I guess, but itsgonnabefine.com was already taken. So itsgonnabefine.fm. And our email address has changed. So no longer using the Gmail. You can still email that one. I'll still get it. But the new email for the show is hello@itsgonnabefine.fm. So I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you think about the various episodes we've had. If you have any ideas for topics or just want to check in, it's always fun to connect. And also, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Another update: for a while there, we were just on Spotify and Apple, but now I can safely say we are on every platform wherever you get your podcasts. So you can subscribe, follow whichever platform that is for you. And as I say, if you're so inclined, if you're enjoying the show, give it a 5-star rating. I would greatly appreciate it. It helps other people find the show, and that would be wonderful. So check out these new things, check out our website, and more to come, potentially soon, YouTube, and putting this out not just on audio, but video as well. So that is all hopefully in the works, and more updates to come there. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So we've talked a bit on the show about technology, nostalgia, the 90s. We've covered a lot of those topics over the last few months. And there's actually been more chatter recently about, life before smartphones and life before big tech and life before that all took over our lives. But this time, it's not really so much from a nostalgic perspective or a nostalgic point of view, which we've discussed in the past. I know I've shared how nostalgic I am for some of that time period, but it's been more along the lines of, was it actually a more boring existence before smartphones, or have we just convinced ourselves that more technology automatically means that we're going to have a better time or in a more exciting time? We'll start with this article from The Atlantic that I mentioned in the opening. This was a very interesting article. The title of it is "What Did People Do Before Smartphones?" And it was written by Ian Bogost, I believe, or Bogost, Bogost. It was actually written a couple years ago, I think about 3 years ago, in 2023, July of 2023. And essentially in this article, the author talks about how he can't really remember how he spent his time before smartphones. So thinking about when he was on the train, if he was at lunch or eating lunch or any other time when he was in between activities, he sort of asked the question like, what did we do? Like he couldn't remember a time before smartphones and how he kept himself busy. And in the article, he asks some of his friends, his middle-aged friends, to also kind of think back to life in the quote unquote old days and remember what it is that they did before smartphones. And the article quote, he finds a spine chilling revelation. We couldn't remember what we did because there was nothing to remember having done. So, when reading this article, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes, but at one point I was even thinking, is this satire? Like, it was so out there to me, some of the points he's made, and we'll go through some of them, but I was like, maybe this is a big joke. Ultimately, I don't think it was satire. I think he was making real points that he believed in. But yeah, it just sounded so ridiculous at times that I was like, this could be satire. But let's go over some excerpts from the article that I think are particularly interesting, and we can talk a little bit about some of our thoughts here. So, really, the question that I think I'm thinking about in reading this article is, were we actually bored before smartphones, or did we just experience boredom differently? And, I completely agree that smartphones have undeniably given us an extraordinary amount of stimulation, information, entertainment, connection. It's also delivered a lot of negative things, but I'm definitely on board with that. That is true. It has given us a lot of those things. However, does more stimulation automatically equal a better or more exciting life? That I'm not so sure about. So, back to the article, first excerpt. He writes, I cannot overemphasize how little there was to do before we all had smartphones. A barren expanse of empty time would stretch out before you, waiting for the bus or for someone to come home or for that next scheduled event to start. Someone might be late or take longer than expected, but no notice of such delay would arrive. So you'd stare out the window, hoping to see some sign of activity down the block. You'd pace or sulk or stew. So just to let everyone know, I kind of disagreed with most of the article. I think he made some interesting points. However, one thing I don't agree with is because he makes this pre-tech world sound so boring. But really, I think the flaw here is that the pre-tech world only sounds boring because we know now what a post-tech world can offer. If we're comparing the two worlds, it's not an apple to apples comparison, right? Like someone in 1998 didn't wake up thinking, oh, another day without TikTok, GPS, Uber, streaming TV, smartphones, DoorDash, AI. Like, what a miserable experience. Like, that just didn't happen because they had their world. And within that world, they found whatever they found exciting. I think there's a mistake in looking backwards and saying, gosh, how did people live like that? I mean, it's because that's what life was. You can't miss, or you don't miss something that you didn't know existed. Back then we figured out how to have fun. We figured out how to connect. We figured out how to be entertained. We figured out how to fill a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning. And I'm pretty sure people weren't walking around in a constant state of despair because they couldn't check Instagram between appointments or waiting for the bus or whatever in between time that they had. And there's plenty of evidence that people did exciting things before big tech and before smartphones and before social media. I mean, there's tons of videos documenting all of this, whether it's via the news media. I mean, we were talking about nostalgia, the 90s. We talked a lot about that show Love Story on Hulu many episodes ago. A few episodes, I think we discussed it. And like, there's tons of video of all these people doing really cool things during that time period, whether it's the Kennedys or others. And so we've seen these videos in the news media, but also we all had home videos. Like the camcorder was a huge thing in the 90s and maybe even before that. But, everyone had home videos and we didn't just video ourselves doing nothing. Like we had things to do. Like so many of my fondest memories are visits from out of town family, how exciting that was when they were coming. And we would go to amusement parks with my cousins. We have still have long lasting jokes and family inside jokes from those times. I loved playing baseball in Little League. Like we kept ourselves busy. We had things to do, and I remember them. It's not like I'm sitting here like, what the hell did I do before a smartphone? Like, I just think that's a very small way to think about a time period before this one. Here's another small, short excerpt from the article. He says, before smartphones, people didn't invest their in between time into forging social bonds or doing self improvement. They mostly suffered through constant, endless boredom. So let us not lament or malign the time we waste on smartphones, at least not so much. Um, so I think the point he's trying to make is, we hear a lot about like, oh my God, the post smartphone world, the social media world, it's so terrible. It's brought so many negative things. And, I've heard it described as a necessary evil, which I think is a interesting way to describe it. I don't love the word evil, but, smartphones, technology, social media, it can bring a lot of positive, of course, but it comes with a lot of negative, like most things. And I think it's okay to recognize that smartphones have not only brought positive things, like it has introduced some issues into our society that we really have to deal with. And we've talked a lot about these topics as well on the show. But from that excerpt, he was talking about, what do you do in between activities? And I was just thinking, I mean, I can think of a million things. Like if I'm waiting for the bus and I don't have a smartphone, people read books. They carried books with them and they would read them on the bus, waiting for the bus, whatever it is, at the doctor's office. Remember magazines that would sit on the doctor's table, Highlights magazine, People magazine. There were things to do. And you could argue that that's today's version of scrolling. You had content to engage with. When you weren't doing something exciting, which you weren't doing every second of the day, we still don't do something exciting every second of the day, but maybe you were talking to your family or I don't know, using your imagination, coming up with creative projects. So I don't, this idea that like we didn't know how to spend our time between activities, between work and school and, moments in our day when we had nothing to do. That's fine. You found things to do. And honestly, there's also nothing wrong with doing nothing. Like if you're waiting for the bus and you just want to sit there and daydream a little bit, take in the fresh air, look at the sun and the clouds, like I think that's incredibly healthy. And we don't do enough of that these days because of smartphones. So kind of really took a different approach. And that's why part of when I was reading that, I was like, maybe it's satire. I don't know. But it just was a little bit out there for me. And that leads me to another post I saw, which is very much related to this because this one was on Instagram and it was about all the nostalgic things we used to do before smartphones, before big tech, and before the world completely changed. And I was looking for the post for the episode, but I couldn't find it. I don't know why. I don't know if they got deleted or whatever, but I couldn't find the post. But I did remember a few things from it. So I want to share some of those with you. And I also found a similar post from BuzzFeed, which had, I don't know, had like, 19 different things. We're not going to talk about all 19, but I have like my top 4 or 5 that I remember from that Instagram post and from the BuzzFeed article. And there were some that overlapped between the two. So a couple that jump out at me that really resonated with me. Again, these are things that we used to do before smartphones. So yeah, we had things to do back then and we enjoyed them. So the first one, if you can think back for those that remember like a weekend night and it's like early evening and you're like, you know what? Tonight we're going to rent a movie and we're going to go to Blockbuster and we're going to pick out that movie and we're going to have a movie night with our friends or our family. Like just talking about this now, I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but it was so exciting to me going there. And maybe it was because my parents didn't let us watch movies that often. So it was a particularly exciting experience. But I think even people who did it weekly still talk about those times as exciting. And my heart pumped a little harder every time we drove up to Blockbuster. I remember the smell of the store. You walk into like a library and it has a smell. For me, Blockbuster had like a scent that you knew you were there, and that excitement of like, what movies would we find? What's out there that I don't know about? What looks funny? What looks cool? That like laminated membership card that we had, and that beep of the membership card when they were renting you the movie and scanning it. All of that was like super, super exciting for me. And so that's one of the things that we did used to do. And we had a great time doing it before smartphones. Another one that these posts brought up was playing outside with your friends until the streetlights came on. And that was like your sign of, hey, it's curfew time. That told you it was time to go home because it was getting dark. So you were kind of lost in this world of play and sports and hanging out on steps and, selling lemonade, whatever it is, and just, having a good time with the neighborhood kids. And, oh, it's getting dark. It's time to go home. We go home. No one had to call you or text you, or your parents didn't send you a DM to say, hey, it's time to come home. So another thing we did, which was, I think, very healthy and exciting. Remember burning CDs? I mean, I love Spotify. We've talked about Spotify too, and I don't want to go back to burning CDs, but at the time, that was a fun project. When these were things, yeah, they took time. We couldn't do it as fast as we can add a Spotify song to our playlist these days, but it's all we knew. And in fact, it was exciting because it was a step up from cassette tapes. So now we can create our own quote unquote cassette tapes through these CDs, our own playlists by burning these CDs. And we enjoyed doing it because, again, it's all we knew. We wanted the music. And this was technology for us back then. And yeah, it took more time. It kept us busy. And that's fine. It was a project. And we wrote on them in our Sharpie pens and maybe designed them a bit and, got those CDRW CDs. I just remember those letters on there. So, and like learning how that technology worked, I found interesting. So, another kind of thing that brought me back there. Do you also remember looking up movie times in newspapers, or even better, calling AOL Movie Phone and that guy like, hello and welcome to AOL Movie Phone, brought to you by. I loved that guy. I loved his voice. Going to the movies was an experience, and it still is in a way. I think you can say that, but back then it was completely on another level because it was the only way to see whatever new film everyone was talking about. You couldn't get it streaming right away, and it was a social event. And lastly, and this is not maybe something exciting per se that we did, but I think it kind of proves that we still did things and had exciting moments. I mentioned, family traveling from out of town. We went on road trips all the time, but do you remember printing out MapQuest directions and bringing them on your trip and following like the step by step? This was, of course, in between like actual maps and GPS, but like having those MapQuest directions. And we did that because we did have places to be. We had things to do, whether we were going to a museum or a family road trip. Things still happened before smartphones and before big technology and social media. People had fun lives because they didn't know an alternative. No one knew about TikTok in the 80s and 90s. No one, and just you can think back to any time period. I don't think they sat there being like, gosh, this is boring and I bet the future is more interesting. No, they made the best of what they had. And it looks like from video and content we have from that time and articles and stories and pictures, it looked like they were having at times a phenomenal time. I really like the 1920s and like that era with speakeasies and, newsies and all that stuff and the music of the time. Even the 50s and 60s looked really fun with like, the sock hops that these kids did in high school. I mean, we don't have anything like that. And like they looked to me super fun. And so I think it's very short-sighted to say that we had nothing to do back then. And also it's okay to have a little bit of downtime and engage with someone on a human level during that time, or not. Sit on your own, have your own thoughts. We don't have to spend our time doing something all the time. And that leads me to my last, I guess, piece of evidence that we did things back in the day, and not only did things, but even crave them and think about them and maybe even want to do them again. And that is, have you seen that these articles and this stuff around MySpace making a comeback? If you remember MySpace, I'm sure many of you do, but for those who don't, it was kind of like pre-Facebook, quote unquote, social media, but it was very, very different. So this particular article I saw on LinkedIn that talked about MySpace, but I've seen other things about MySpace as well on different platforms. And Gen Z in particular seems all about it. And I find it so ironic because they're making TikTok videos about MySpace and how amazing MySpace looks and could be. They're saying how refreshing it would be to have social media without the ads. And, like the way Facebook became. So when Facebook started, it was just, kind of like a social network and started with colleges only. And then it expanded to adults outside of college, and then it just became this advertising machine where it was all sponsored content and ways to insert ads. I mean, even today if you watch reels on Facebook, like you've got the ads at the bottom, they're constantly coming up, and people are annoyed with that at this point and they're a little bit burned out. So this idea of something like a MySpace, which never had that level of marketing and advertising and clicking and optimization, this idea, without the pressure of turning everything into, optimized content, like that pressure exists today, and the pressure to keep up with the latest trends. I mean, I think I've mentioned, like, I'm trying to do some more social media for the show. And like I mentioned, moving into hopefully YouTube soon. And it's a lot. And like, it's really hard to keep up with the latest and greatest. And it's constantly changing of what's the the best practice and best in class, and the way to engage people. So it's exhausting. But on something like MySpace, you were able to just be playful with it. You had fun. It removes the competition. You're not always thinking about what's this creator doing? What's that creator doing? How do I match them? How do I get more followers? This constant competition. Now, I should say, I never used MySpace myself. I don't recall ever signing up for an account, but I've seen it. I have friends who have had it. I remember when it was around. And I do know that one of the things people really appreciated about it is that your online identity on MySpace felt more like your space than a standardized feed inside somebody else's algorithm. So like today on Instagram, we all exist within Instagram, and Instagram is telling us what we're going to see, and the algorithm is controlling it all. We're on And MySpace, you could decorate your page, you could put backgrounds and wallpaper and music, and you could really express yourself. And there was no, like, it wasn't like you were existing inside MySpace's container. You made your MySpace page your own. And I don't think that experience exists in today's social media. So I think it's pretty clear, at least from this article that I saw and from others, and again, these TikTok videos that people are putting out about their excitement for something like MySpace, that creators and social media users are fatigued. And it's so interesting how people are voluntarily creating limitations that technology had previous eliminated. So the idea of going back to something like MySpace, which Facebook, Instagram, TikTok got rid of, and now we're like, no, please bring it back. The article specifically, this one from LinkedIn, mentioned that audiences are gravitating, quote, towards spaces that feel personal, participatory, and low pressure. And I think there's something really important about that. So there you go. Not only did we do things before big tech and smartphones, but we are actually craving that vibe again. So ultimately, I think all of this is healthy. I think it's great to push back when something doesn't work for you anymore. Cindy and I talked about this a few episodes ago when we talked about AI advancements, and, it's not working for everyone, and that's okay. And you can, quote unquote, fight back and do what works for you. And, if you feel like something's moving too quickly or getting out of hand, try to change it. That's totally fine, totally legitimate. And when I think about for myself, like I mentioned in the beginning, like I see the value in smartphones. I see the necessary part or the good part of social media, and I do see the evil part of social media. So there is a balance for me. There are elements of technology that I love. I use my smartphone every single day. In certain ways, it plays a very important role in my life day to day. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. But I do also recognize that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You could appreciate your smartphone and use it in a way that works for you, while also appreciate and love those simpler moments when like the noise is turned off. I will say I'm young enough to remember that we still had fun and exciting lives before these things lived in our pockets. So I think, ultimately you do you. If you're loving big tech, smartphones, and the ever changing social media trends and content, more power to you. Just stop looks maxing. That's my only ask. Do it. Just let's stop with the looks maxing. But, if you're nostalgic for the simpler days or you miss those or you feel like those are better and, when there was less technology, that's great too. Right? Like you get to set up your life in whatever way works for you. Ultimately, you can love your iPhone and still put it away for dinner. You can use Instagram and still think Instagram is occasionally terrible or more than occasionally, whatever. You can love YouTube and still enjoy sitting around with your friends doing absolutely nothing, maybe talking about YouTube videos, but not watching them. And you can still appreciate the incredible conveniences of modern technology while recognizing that some things we lost were worth keeping. So, if we can do that, find that balance and focus on what works for us, I'm pretty sure it's going to be fine. See you next time.